This is a brutal post-apocalyptic organization where anyone who disobeys is turned into zombie guards around the fence. The Saviors have become the most terrifying presence in this region. Rick's group has finally had enough and decided to convince other communities to unite and resist. Under Jesus' lead, they drove to an open area, the outskirts of the kingdom. The car had just come to a stop. At the head of the group was Richard, who recognized his old friend Jesus, whom the two communities had come into contact with a long time ago. Jesus greeted them and introduced Rick, acknowledging him as a like-minded community leader. Richard understood the purpose of their visit and led them towards the kingdom. When Rick and his group entered, they were shocked. The place exuded a peaceful atmosphere, with various fruits and vegetables being grown. People seemed relaxed, without a hint of the post-apocalyptic vibe. It was hard to believe such a place existed. Rosita, however, points out that they are too comfortable in their lives. And although they are numerous, can they really fight? Rick looked at everything before him. This was the life he wanted to provide for his family. At that moment, Tara looked into the distance, thinking she might be mistaken. The others were drawn to her shout. To their surprise, it was Morgan. How did he end up here? Morgan was happy to see them too. Richard was astonished that they knew each other, and their favorable impression of Rick's group increased. He then led them to meet King Ezekiel. Rick and Daryl quickly inquired about Carol's well-being. Morgan explained that Carol was pursued by the Saviors, but he found her and received help from the kingdom. However, Carol wanted to be away from people, so she left. Morgan didn't reveal Carol's whereabouts, as he promised not to disclose it to anyone. Relieved to know Carol was safe, both Rick and Daryl sighed in relief. Upon reaching the hall, Jesus smiled and prepared to introduce Rick's group, but then he realized they were standing far away and had forgotten to tell them about the tiger. After a brief explanation, they all approached. As they walked, Jesus introduced Rick and his team to the others. In a kingly manner, Ezekiel welcomed the friends from afar, asking why they sought an audience with him. Rick was a little uncomfortable. It was the first time he had ever called someone king, but he quickly adjusted to it. Rick explained that they were from Alexandria's safe zone, the Hilltop, and the Kingdom 3 communities, all forced to serve the Saviors. Alexandria's safe zone once fought the Saviors, and they won. At the time, they didn't know much about the Saviors, and it was only later that they realized that they had merely exterminated an outpost of the Saviors. They came to know that the kingdom also provided tributes to the Saviors, which meant they must have experienced how those brutes ruled through violence and fear. At this point, Jesus explained to Ezekiel, because the kingdom's tribute to the Saviors is a secret that even the inhabitants of the kingdom don't know about. Ezekiel was slightly annoyed that Jesus revealed this to outsiders. Rick continued, stating that they came to request the kingdom's help, to join them in resisting the Saviors, fighting for the freedom of everyone. Ezekiel calmly responded that their request was dangerous. Michonne added that several of their people were brutally killed by the Saviors.
Who?
Abraham. Glenn. Spencer. Olivia. Eugene was taken. They took Daryl. He escaped. Every second he's out here, he's a target.
Hearing this, Morgan also moved. Rick continued, emphasizing that his people were strong, very strong, but currently, they were understaffed, and the Saviors had looted all their guns. That's why they needed to join forces with everyone. Ezekiel remained silent. Richard, standing beside him, spoke up, stating that they had manpower and weapons. If they united and struck first, they could undoubtedly defeat the Saviors. Richard also hates the Saviors so much that he has to pay tribute to the Saviors every week in return for nothing but demands and humiliation. He urged Ezekiel to seriously consider the matter and not wait until it was too late to resist. Ezekiel didn't immediately agree to their proposal but offered them a night's rest. He said he would ponder over it and give them an answer the next day. Rick didn't say much and could only wait. That night, Benjamin also talked to Ezekiel about his views on the Saviors. He believed the kingdom should cooperate with Rick. Benjamin and Ezekiel said, "You saw the look in Rick's eyes. They'll fight with or without our help. They can't win if we don't help them and turn our backs on them. If they win, it indirectly helps us, but that's not our style. You put me under Morgan's tutelage so I'd be ready for anything, and I am." Ezekiel appreciated Benjamin's sense of responsibility and felt proud of him, but he needed more time to think about it. On the same night, something happened at Alexandria's safe zone. After Rick and the others left, Gabriel took up the responsibility of protecting the community and was on duty tonight. Feeling bored, he flipped through the Bible. Suddenly, Gabriel sensed some activity within the community, seemingly coming from the armory. Thinking it might be a rodent, he proceeded without any precautions, but then he heard the sound of things being knocked over inside. Next, Gabriel started loading all the food and some of the weapons in the armory into crates, which were then loaded onto a vehicle. Afterward, Gabriel closed the gate and left with all the community's supplies. If one were to look closely, they would see a figure in the passenger seat. The next morning, the kingdom was as peaceful as ever. People exercised, and children practiced archery. Richard brought Rick and his group to see Ezekiel, and they were all eager to know his decision. In the end, Ezekiel refused to join the resistance against the saviors. It wasn't that Ezekiel lacked courage, but he couldn't bear to see more children become orphans. Many parents had already sacrificed for the community. Daryl couldn't help but quip, "You call yourself a king, but you lack the spirit of a true leader." Ezekiel wasn't offended, only telling Daryl that resisting would come at the cost of lives. Then, Ezekiel turned to Rick and explained that while the peace with the saviors was unstable, at least it was peace, and he had to hold on to it for the sake of his people. Ezekiel says he can let Daryl stay. The saviors won't get into the kingdom. Though disappointed, Rick and his group didn't argue further and left without saying goodbye. Richard personally escorts Rick and the others because Ezekiel doesn't approve, but he wants to join Rick's team. However, Rick told Richard that they currently lacked manpower and weapons and had to wait for the right moment. Richard argued that the longer they waited, the stronger the saviors would become, implying that it was their contributions that strengthened the saviors. So, the longer they delayed, the harder it would be to defeat the saviors. Rick naturally understands this, so now he has to go around looking for allies and weapons. The gate opened, and everyone prepared to leave. Daryl initially wanted to follow them, but Rick convinced him to stay. It was safer, and he could talk to Ezekiel more. The next time they gathered would be the time for action. They drove back from the highway, but they found themselves blocked by a dozen cars. Jesus analyzed that it was the Savior's doing. Carl directed everyone's attention to the other side, where the Savior's base was. They had blocked the road to prevent anyone from passing through. They decided to move the cars and put them back in place after crossing the road. At this moment, Michonne, holding a pair of binoculars, noticed something. Rick took the binoculars and was shocked. The highway they were on was a spur road. When they walked into the main road, there was a cable tied with many bundles of bombs. Once triggered, it would be a big explosion. While everyone was wondering, Carl said that when they were hiding behind the truck, they heard someone talking about using bombs to deal with the zombies. Rick realized that the reason for blocking the side road with cars was to concentrate the zombies here and then trigger an explosion to destroy the zombies. It was evident that a horde of zombies would pass through here soon. They all had the same idea. It's claiming these explosives for yourself that gives you an extra chance against the saviors. But the hardest part is dismantling the... Rosita stepped forward and opened a manhole cover, revealing the detonation device. Disarming the explosives was her expertise. As she prepared to deactivate the detonator, Jesus' radio received an internal order from the saviors. The saviors were sending a team to check if Daryl had returned to Alexandria safe zone. They would arrive before lunch. The situation is critical and they must return before the saviors arrive. While Rosita successfully disarmed a black object, it was only the first step. They needed to dismantle the bombs attached to the cable. Each member proceeded with utmost caution, afraid of triggering any mishaps. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. Rosita directed them to load the disarmed bombs into the car. If there were no dents or tears, it meant they were not triggered and could be kept for their use. If anything seemed off, they couldn't keep it. Rosita put it back on the grass. Carl called out to his father, pointing at the distance. A horde of zombies was approaching, and they had to hurry and disarm the rest of the explosives. In a matter of minutes, they disarmed most of the bombs. Rick directed the others to drive the cars to the designated area. They wasted no time and quickly moved the cars back to the side road, restoring them to their original positions. As the zombies get closer, Rick tells Sasha and Jesus to walk back to the hilltop. Time was running out. Carl had already returned the cars to their original positions. The zombie horde was almost there. Michonne suggested they split up to escape. Feeling a bit panicked, Rick refused. Because he thought of an issue, they had to let the zombies here be partially destroyed and cause an explosion. Otherwise the saviors would know that the bomb here had been disarmed. Rick decided that he and Michonne would each drive a car. They would simultaneously start the cars to destroy the zombies. They quickly got into their respective cars, and with a special method, they started the engines. The zombies were getting closer, and Michonne's hands trembled a bit, but she managed to start the car. Rick succeeded as well. They exchanged a glance.